Please take your seats so we can move to the closing keynote session. Thank you. It wouldn't be CALRC without an amazing keynote session finale, so I am so pleased to introduce Ontario Smith, who's the Principal and Chief Operating Officer with the SOMOS Group. That's a team of experts who work to build and sustain community resilience and promote economic development. He's also a valued member of the CCLR Board of Directors, and he's going to moderate today's closing plenary keynote session. Unfortunately, Secretary Garcia was not able to join us today, but she did record a video that we look forward to sharing with you. We are so pleased to have with us today Director Assefa from the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, and we thank Thanne Berg, Deputy Director at DTSC, for stepping in at the last minute and making this a memorable final closing session. Ontario.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean. I see people are rolling their bags, so we'll be thoughtful about time. Really happy to be here again. Ontario Smith, Principal and Chief Operating Officer of SOMOS Group. We help build cities, and this conference has been a great opportunity for people to share ideas, and this is a wonderful way to close this conference with a plenary with two experts who bring a really diverse set of experiences and insights into how their work can help inform how we solve these challenges. So I'm going to pass it to them to provide a brief introduction, and then we're going to play the video from Secretary Garcia. First, I want to introduce Samuel Assefa, who's the Director of the Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. So if you want to give an intro, we'll start there.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here. This is an important conversation. So I lead an office called the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. Most of you who are engaged here would probably know it as OPR, Office of Planning and Research. It was the office, we will be celebrating our 55th year this Friday. It was created in 1970, right after the most stringent environmental law was enacted in California. The then Governor Reagan actually signed CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, and created this office within the Governor's Office to be the state's agency for everything land use, CEQA, climate, and more. So we just changed our name in the last year under Governor Newsom to really get the office ready for the next 50 years in terms of our focus. But land use is a core function of it, and climate policies being the other one.
Okay, my name's Thanne Berg, and I'm Deputy Director at DTSC over Site Mitigation and Restoration. So the Site Mitigation and Restoration Program is the cleanup program. It's analogous to the Superfund program on the federal side. Brownfields is one part of it, but I also cover military sites, national priority list sites, state sites. So brownfields is super important within our program. We work very closely with our local agencies as well as the water boards to make sure that these sites get restored. So happy to be here today. Sorry you don't get to have Yana, but I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So speaking of that, we're going to start by playing the video from Secretary Garcia, and then we'll jump into our discussion.
Hi, everyone. What a privilege to close out this year's California Land Recycling Conference and to have the opportunity to reflect on how we can all build a better California. I am so inspired by the innovation, commitment, and collaboration displayed by everyone here. Community leaders, environmental professionals, developers, and public servants, all who are working together to renew land and empower communities. As you prepare to wrap up this conference, this is a powerful moment to reflect on land reuse across California and how we can all better align environmental cleanup, community interests, and housing investment. It's about transforming land with purpose, and in doing so, uplifting communities, protecting public health, restoring the environment, and supporting housing where people can safely live, work, and play. At Cal EPA, an important part of our mission is cleaning up pollution wherever it exists, in soil, water, and air, so that all Californians can live in a safe and healthy environment. That mission is at the heart of all of the work being done here. When we clean up contaminated properties, we don't just reclaim land, we restore opportunity and hope, especially in communities that have long suffered environmental burdens. This year, California is also taking critical steps forward to increase housing supply and invest in communities. We're cutting red tape and focusing on results, streamlining reviews, making funding more accessible, and aligning state resources to support housing and community infrastructure. Let me give a few concrete examples of how this work comes together in practice. The Miss Margaret Gordon Westport in West Oakland opened just earlier this year and is a model of what's possible when cleanup and funding align with community vision and leadership, turning a once underutilized site into homes and hope. The development includes 58 affordable housing units, with 50% of those units reserved for permanent supportive housing, including on-site services so that residents who need additional support are not left behind. The project leveraged DTSC's Equitable Community Revitalization Grant program to help address contamination and clean up the site so it could be safely reused. When combined with other funding sources, that cleanup stretched even further, resulting in a project that is providing housing and supportive services and ongoing rental assistance through project-based vouchers. Using another $1.3 million in Equitable Communities Revitalization Grant programs, we have now completed the former Lincoln Beach site, a long blighted property in Anaheim. Developers here leveraged that ECRG funding to construct 47 affordable housing units for seniors and transitional aged youth. DTSC expedited review and approval processes that helped this project move quickly through environmental hurdles, setting the stage for construction. It's projects like these that show how environmental cleanup, policy reforms, and state and local funding programs can work together. These projects show that it's possible to clean up hazardous or polluted sites and turn them into housing. It's possible to combine funding from many sources, city bonds, county funds, state grants, and cleanup grants, to make those projects viable. And involvement from frontline communities and other interested parties with regulatory alignment and local leadership are essential to making these land reuse projects happen. Now, as you return to your home communities, I challenge you to keep pushing forward with what you've learned. Seek out sites that need cleanup. Use all public and private tools available. Leverage recent legislation. Build partnerships early with local, state, nonprofit, and community partners. View these underutilized sites as solutions for safe housing, for economic opportunity, and for environmental health. Because ultimately, cleaning up pollution and creating safe, vibrant places to live, work, and play are inseparable. On behalf of Cal EPA, I express my sincere gratitude for all of you who are working hard to build a better California. What you are doing is proof of what is possible when we all work together. Thank you.
Awesome, that was amazing. Just a sort of a housekeeping question or a comment. For any questions that are from the audience, please submit those through the Whova app. We'll go through the Whova app, identify those questions, and then as much as we can, try to answer those or weave those into the conversation. The Secretary talked about viewing, brownfield redevelopment, viewing the work that we talked about at this conference as an opportunity, not just to fix past impacts, but to build for the future. So I want to start with that question of just generally talking about, in your roles, how can turning these underutilized and contaminated sites into housing help California address its housing shortage, while fueling local economies? So we'll start with Thanne and then work back so I can get the microphone.
Well, Secretary Garcia talked about it a little already, our ECRG grants. And really, this is the work that we're doing to revitalize some of these communities and bring affordable housing to them. Thus far, we have over 9,000 housing units total as part of our ECRG grants. There are $131 million in 90 grants, and a majority of those housing units will be affordable housing. But we're not just doing affordable housing, we're also doing green space. We're bringing grocery stores to places where there's a food desert. all of these projects are really great for vulnerable communities, and I find it extremely meaningful. In my role, I often get the problems when it comes to my level, and this is the one thing I really love about this conference. On Tuesday morning, most of you weren't there, but it's when the ECRG grantees talk about their projects, and I find it extremely moving to see how much impact it has on the community. It brings resources to the community, it brings housing, and it's just so obviously meaningful to the community members. I darn near burst into tears a couple of times, and so I just want to share one. This is Salinas, and it's a recreational and sports facility. And they called it brownfield to playing field. So, but it's more than just a recreational facility. They're also offering healthcare services for the community to come. In 2024, there were 35,000 visitors, 6,000 opportunities to access healthcare at the facility as well. And it also brings people, as they're coming to the community, it brings money to give to the local economy. It brings people to stay in hotels. So it's really a great story, and I wish everyone could see that story, because then you understand how meaningful these grants are. I just want to say that this is the meaningful story we need to tell statewide to all our communities. I don't think that people realize what a great thing this is for communities. And I think as an agency, Cal EPA, DTSC, that we need to do a better job of telling these stories to the general public. And so I also ask you, as you have different roles in this process, to join with us, try to get that story out there so they understand what great work this is.
Great. I think so California has two major challenges. One is housing shortage always, and then two, how do we build our economy around that, but in a way that is sustainable. So one of the most sustainable things that you could do definitely is repurposing brownfields for any number of uses versus looking at it as a liability, which we often do. And not just brownfields, but any vacant land or abandoned properties are an incredible opportunity to really address both our housing and climate and economic opportunity needs. I think California and a number of the programs from state, federal, US EPA programs play a significant role in helping incentivize that. So a good example, St. Rest plus Food Shelter Hub in Fresno. This is just a great story of about a 7,000 square foot former meat packing site, as well as a gas station, utilized Cal EPA dollars to clean up, and then eventually multiple sources were used to actually revitalize that as one of the most important community centers there, as a food share hub. That's not just what it does, in a place where there's a significant need for healthy foods and generally for food, but it became a community center. And significant number of activities take place there, where once for decades, it was just basically an abundant former meat packing warehouse. That's just a small example of a building. Land is the same thing. In downtown Fresno does really good work in now repurposing the downtown near downtown, formerly abandoned sites, turning them into this one in Chinatown, 57-unit affordable housing, a site that was completely unused for decades again. So Transform Fresno is intentionally looking into the significant amount of opportunity that they have with land that is either abandoned, vacant, or was brownfield. So it is a critical asset.
Absolutely. So we're talking about abundance. We're going to come back to that topic. So we started at a really high level talking about this sort of shared state need to create housing and fuel local economies. Samuel, I want to talk about your background in local municipalities and talk about what those municipalities can do or what sort of, I'm going to call them steps forward those local agencies can make to facilitate the kind of development that we need.
Yeah, what you're referring to is most of my career has been for cities, from Chicago to Boulder to Seattle, San Francisco, working as either a planning director or city planner or urban planner. So that's where I cut my teeth about land use. And now sitting at the state level, it's a different animal. So I think for cities, it is critical now to really rethink about our regulatory framework that we have, and cities regulate zoning. The state enables or creates incentives. But for cities, I think, again, come back to this issue of how we see land. I come from a land use background in architecture, so I have that bias, which is land. What you decide on your land is what really addresses almost every need that you have as a city. Economic development, housing, address climate issues, transform places, create communities. But one of the biggest challenges that we have, even as progressive as California is, it's not easy to get entitlements. And we get bogged down into permits and processes that are really actually beginning to do the exact opposite of what they are intended to do, including what my office administers, the CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, a brilliant environmental tool. By far, it was a cutting-edge policy. As most of you who engage in land use know, it is also a very cumbersome process. The state is breaking down those sort of barriers, and we're working on that significantly. I think cities need to look into how they regulate, how they permit, because the challenges now are accelerating from climate change, drought, fire, and housing needs. So all of those really rely on a proactive approach by cities. And of course, you have to do it right, and it has to address climate issues, and it should address equity issues, and it should be done right. But we need to rethink about our regulatory framework that is really getting in the way, and ask the question about, are we really getting, again, not all cities are like that, but in general, that's one of the challenges that we have in terms of getting to where we need to be in terms of housing supply, redevelopment, or any transformation that really address the economy as well as climate. So, and I've been there, I was part of it in terms of we are very difficult to change. You get a lot of regulations over regulations, and then it's really hard to get out of it.
I'm going to crack a joke here. As a person who tried to entitle buildings in San Francisco, I appreciate the acknowledgement that it can be difficult. Thanne, you mentioned at your level, you solve problems and remove bottlenecks. Can you talk as an agency person, like what that looks like? How do you balance equity concerns, balance your policy concerns with the goals to actually move projects forward?
Great question. I am a public servant and have been for 30 years, and I think there's a lot of advice I could give to folks dealing with us and us dealing with the general public, and that is we don't always understand what the developer needs, what the community needs, and I think the key to us all is better communication up front. And so there's a few things that we're trying to do as part of Cal EPA, DTSC, the water boards, and I'll just give one illustration of what that means. When I first started this job a year ago, my number one issue that I heard over and over again was vapor intrusion and getting a path to closure on these projects so that we could actually get something built. And the underlying theme of it was that we weren't really communicating and we weren't using all the tools available to us. So what we're doing now is we're doing workshops on vapor intrusion, and we've opened it up to the general public. We're talking to consultants, we're talking to proponents, to developments, we're talking to communities, community leaders, and we're putting all the tools in the toolbox, and we're trying to manage the risk in a reasonable way and come in agreement early on in the project so that we can get to closure on the sites. That's the goal. We have had one workshop thus far. You can go and see it on YouTube. There's going to be 5 more coming up. But the goal is to find a way to get to closure so these projects can be built. We have the tools out there. It doesn't have to be the most expensive thing. There are ways to mitigate risk in order to get these buildings, these facilities built and bring these reuse back to the communities. Again, it's just that it's all about communication, getting the stakeholders together early on so that everyone understands what the different needs are. We don't have any idea how your funding works. You ask us and we'll just go blank in the eye. You have to really tell us what you need in the time frame you need it, because we're not going to understand that. And vice versa, we need to be telling you what we need on a timely basis so that up front we understand how to get these projects done. All right.
It's amazing. We're following the script. We started this conference with Brownfields 101 talking about the need to communicate, and we're hearing from agency leadership the need to communicate. I think that we often assume that our regulatory partners and our municipal partners understand what is driving us and what is keeping us up at night, and you would be surprised to know that they often don't. So going back to communication and collaboration, as leaders of 2 organizations, I think there are these intense obligations, right, of developers. How can the agencies work together to streamline that process? Like what are the agencies doing to work together to remove uncertainty and to facilitate development?
I could speak to one of the agencies that I chair, which is called the Strategic Growth Council. You're talking about state government agencies.
Talking about government agencies,
Yeah.
yes.
So the SGC, some of you who've engaged with it, it is one of the best models of all of government working together. So it represents 7 state agencies. Secretary Garcia is one of the council members. I sit as the OPR, then now LCI director, chairs the Strategic Growth Council. So Transportation Agency, Natural Resources, Cal EPA, Agriculture, Health and Human Services, HCD, they're all represented in that body. So we don't look at just housing as a housing project or transportation as a transportation project. All of our funding programs, as well as policies that are developed through that, have not only the secretaries of those agencies sit as council members, but the staff from each of those agencies function as staff support for the council. And that kind of coordination, when you look at grants from Transformative Climate Communities Program or Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, you work collaboratively because the way you develop the guidelines or the criteria are based on that everything is interconnected, from brownfields to housing, transportation, climate, health. So we try to have this all-of-government approach in the work that the agencies make decisions. So all of the decision makers are there versus a typical structure where you have cabinet members and agencies, and each one has their own silos, if you will. And that has generally been, whether it's municipal, county, or state, or even federal, that's kind of has been the government structure. I think SGC provides kind of a new thinking across agencies, and it also enables us to take chances, risks, or innovate or pilot projects that then can get scaled. So I think that's one good model of how government can work across agencies.
Amazing. I'm going to ask Thanne a slightly different question. It's amazing to hear that government is structured to remove silos, right? You hear a lot of stories about government and inefficiencies, and hearing that government is being structured to address the specific concerns of our time is wonderful to hear. Speaking of DC, how, in your role, Thanne, how are we integrating new streams of federal investments, if they exist, and how are we leveraging state investments to catalyze private sector activity and facilitate long-term growth at a time of significant uncertainty? I'm going to give you the big loaded question.
Oh, great, politics. I'll just give a little bit of a, from my perspective, where we are as on the cleanup program. So I came from US EPA, so the federal government, worked there for 28 years, and I saw many administrations come and go, and one program that always got support across the aisle was the cleanup program, Superfund, consistently. So we're actually in a good place as opposed to a lot of the other environmental programs. And we're seeing that when we're working with US EPA. So they are continuing to give us brownfields money, and we're continuing to see cleanups happening. So that is the good news. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think that no matter who you voted for, I think no one wants pollution next door. No one wants to live in pollution. So I think it's just one of those topics that has been supported by both sides of the aisle historically. And we are trying, as well as I know US EPA and the water boards, to make sure that there are opportunities available for funding. The ECRG grant, we've had 2 rounds of that. Unfortunately, we don't have a third yet, but that would be another way we would like to do it. But we know there's also SCAP funding from the water boards. There's also some funding for US EPA. So it's out there. It's not as much as it used to be, but I think it's still available. And we're trying our best to facilitate and make sure that those funds are used in an efficient manner so we can get as much done as possible.
That's a great answer. You navigated the minefield. Samuel, do you want to answer?
Well, just briefly, I think still California is benefiting, and we'll see in some of the funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that currently, almost $15 billion for, transportation related, from bridges to roads, $1.6 billion for sort of water infrastructure that, and combined with state dollars, those kinds of infrastructure enhancements are catalysts for private development. Brownfield cleanup dollars from the EPA are catalysts that really take the risk away from private investment. And now our focus is more and more around climate resiliency in those infrastructures to make it more attractive to, insurance and other risks that the private sector has, a hard time dealing with because of climate change. We're trying to get ahead of that. Well, we're behind it in terms of climate change and wildfire and all that, but we're trying to deal with that we need to build smart and use these federal, state dollars in that long-term perspective. And I say that again and again, which is, we need to address this from a sustainable perspective because it is imperative. So those kinds of investments are, catalysts for the private sector investment.
So our firm was really privileged to do one of the first climate resilient district analysis on behalf of San Diego County. And one of the things that resonated for us was the willingness of municipalities of all sizes to invest in climate resiliency. Can you talk about what roles your agencies will have, I think, as the discussion sort of transitions from a lot of mitigation to long-term planning and resiliency? What roles do you have in facilitating investment and local appetite for making those kinds of commitments?
Yeah, my office, I mentioned SGC, but the rest of my office also has a number of grants for regional resiliency as well as local resiliency, climate adaptation programs, technical assistance, and a number of the ones that I mentioned, the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. That's one of the most successful one. Just last year, close to $750 million. That was a record, and about the same amount the year before. That catalyzes significant amount of other infrastructure as part of it. So the role we play is from a policy development, grants, and technical assistance. And then one of the most impactful recently in terms of removing barriers is the AB 149. It's judicial streamlining so that you make it easier for big infrastructure, especially green infrastructure, to get expedited. Typically, CEQA litigation takes 3 to 5 years for any major project. Under the judicial streamlining that the governor, initiated and passed 2 years ago, my office administers that. Now, if you go through that process, any major infrastructure projects, and my office recommends that the governor certifies it, no more than 270 days for litigation. We've got about 9 or 10 projects and billions of dollars that are going and have gone through that process just in the last year and a half. So that's kind of a game changer. So we play those kinds of roles as well from my agency.
Okay, climate change. So I can speak to DTSC and the water boards and the cleanup programs. I can't speak to all the other Cal EPA agencies, boards, offices, but I do want to talk about our work with climate change. So we're looking at sites that have already been remedied and are in operation and maintenance long term, but we're also looking at new sites that are coming across our plate. We have a climate change engineering group, and we're prioritizing sites for review for sea level rise and groundwater rise as well. So we have guidance out to our project managers, but we also have online tools, a USGS modeled sea level rise tool so that folks can go online and actually look and see where we're anticipating sea level rise or groundwater rise, so that if you have a property nearby, that you can understand what we are seeing projected and inform you about those interests. Right now, we're focusing mainly on sea level rise, but we're also going to look at wildfires, drought, flooding, so that we can give some tools to the general public on all the effects that climate change is bringing to our projects. So giving you the tools to help yourself. This is a cross-agency effort within Cal EPA, but it's also an effort between California and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Right now, climate change is not an accepted phrase, so we're just calling it something else. As we're looking at remedies, we're talking about remedy protectiveness. We have a process. Once a remedy as a site is in place, there's a 5-year review process. And during those 5-year reviews, where we make sure the remedies are still protective, we are considering climate change effects. So those are just a few things that we have in the works right now.
That's amazing. I'm going to turn it to you, Samuel. I'm going to ask a question. You feel free to answer this question. I want to also talk about design. One of the things that I think is really impressive about your background is the ability to, have this broad policy perspective, but also the ability to have done work at a municipal level. What role does design play, whether it's urban design, permitting design, or community planning even? What roles do they play in creating the kind of economic conditions that we want for the state of California?
Well, at its core, the concept of urban design or building design, they're all sort of posited with the idea that you are going to transform communities in their lives, in their livability. Where it has a significant role now is how do you make design accessible to all? So generally, when you think design, it just becomes kind of a high-end luxury for the most part. But more and more, I think the profession, especially urban planners, are focusing on the basic fundamental transformation at the ground level, from street connections to building massing and addressing health, addressing quality of place, Those are all important components that at one point in the profession, 20, 30 years ago, you have a landscape architect just doing the landscape component. Now, more and more decision makers and planners and designers see a more integrated approach to transforming a place. It is also becoming more and more an economic engine and making cities competitive. If you have, walkable, bikeable, transit-focused, designed cities, they do well. Now, there are challenges, obviously. We haven't cracked the nut in terms of the affordability part of it, and where planners like me or designers are struggling is how to connect the dots. And I'll give you a quick example. And I was in Seattle. First time I went there as a planning director, I went to a neighborhood to buy this Ethiopian bread. There's a store that's been there for 35 years, and I was excited. I had just moved there, and I talked to the woman who owned the place, and I said, oh, and she said, I told her that I just moved here. She didn't know that I was a planner. And she gave me advice which neighborhoods I should look if I was going to buy or rent in Seattle, because it has become so expensive. And all the places she told me are about 45 minutes away from downtown. And I didn't think, and I just said, oh, I actually have to be no more than 30 minutes bike ride from my work, and that's just been my case everywhere I went. And she looked at me, and her face changed. And I said, what is going on? And she said, well, unfortunately, because of people like you who want to ride their bikes or take transit, this whole area close to downtown has become so attractive. After 35 years, my lease is going to be up in 2 years, and I'll be moving out. So here's all these great policies that I was taught to implement, make your cities walkable, bikeable transit. I am creating displacement because we don't put the guardrails ahead of that. But we're learning more and more around that. And just from that lesson, I won't go into it, but there was a whole other transformation in the Duwamish Valley in Seattle that we put the guardrails first, which is to make sure that the communities that are going to impact it should have land ownership. So design has a lot of role in terms of what you do, but we also have to be cognizant of the unintended impacts of even good design has. So
that's a wonderful answer. As a person who runs a design team and a planning team, we start by saying planning is people. You can talk at a very high level about massing and about fenestration and about floor area ratios, but ultimately, if you're not focused on the impact on people, we think you're missing the point. That's our ethos. One thing you also mentioned, and Thanne, I'll turn it to you. We talked about innovation, right? How do these agencies facilitate innovation to narrow the gap to make these projects constructible? What can state agencies do to take these big ideas, but also implement particular policy changes that facilitate development?
Good question. So Cal EPA, DTSC, our main mission is to protect human health and the environment. And we encourage innovation, and we encourage, but our #1 mission is just to make sure everyone's safe. And so as we're working with the consultants, as we're working with the developers, we need to have the conversations early on so that we understand what the issues are, what the goals are, and how we can integrate to their projects, their needs into the overall idea of whatever that project is, so that we make sure that the people who end up there are safe. But in general, I think it's the proponents. I think it is listening to the cities about what their goals are and what policies they're trying to implement, and then we're trying to help them find a way to get to the end. I think it's super important that everyone, all the stakeholders are brought to the table, including the community, because my experience is that the community members know what they want, and if we just listen to them as we're doing the development, then we could probably provide them what they need.
Fantastic answer. As a consultant, we tell our clients, just listen. You're asking a lot of questions. Make sure you listen to the responses. Samuel, feel free to answer that question. I'm going to tee up our final question, which is, as well, if you could leave this audience of practitioners and policymakers and community leaders with a call to action to advance abundance through land use, what would it be?
I would say, thinking land use not as a limiting factor, more as a significant opportunity. I think the story often, especially in California or places like San Francisco, you mentioned, it is seen as this, challenge, generally sort of having to go through entitlements. But to really tell the story of not about it being limiting, but incredible opportunities to address all these other issues. And the call to action is really reframe how we think about land use and tell that story in every different parts of your roles or professions. It's really the opportunities that it brings to addressing a lot of our challenges. That kind of thinking, I believe, and we try to practice that now within my own agencies, right? How do we get to yes is the question. And the way you do that is by looking at opportunities that you may not have thought of if you thought of land use or brownfields more as limiting versus more of an abundance perspective. So tell that story in everything that you do to really reframe that question and that issue.
Okay, I guess I'm going to focus on the part of abundance where we're overregulated and trying to eliminate some of the red tape to get projects done. Because I think that's the place where, as a government, we have the most responsibility to try to eliminate it. I was just talking to my Southern California Division Chief, Ben Stanfield, and Miriam a few minutes ago, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what we can and should be doing as the state government. And I think we just need to have the conversations early on about what is needed. And we need to work with other state agencies. I'll just give an example. As we have people come in who want to do a project, oftentimes we have someone assigned, but there's not the conversation early on about where that project should be going. In fact, it's not a lot of conversation between the project manager and their management. We are public servants. We're here to try to help you get your project done. And it's also reaching out to the community. So Miriam has helping us all work together to C3 to reach out to community members to make sure that their voice is heard in the process. It's also working with our state and local governments. So if I had to give advice to people who come in, who want to get something done, this is the things I would say. Don't assume that we understand what you need or how your project or how your timing works on your financing. Pull together the stakeholders early on, talk to the community early and often. Who is your oversight agency? So there's multiple ways you could go. It could be DTSC, it could be the water boards, it could be a local agency. So thoughtful about who is the best one to meet your needs and your timeline. That's super important. Pick up the phone and call us. And same, we should be picking up the phone and calling you when there's problems. I can't fix a problem I don't know about. And so I encourage you, if you're having issues, then you should give us a call, and if you don't get an answer there, try their boss maybe. We don't want to be the problem. We're trying to help you. We want to partner with you. We want to get to solutions. And so we want to make sure that we give you the tools that you need in order to get there. Again, it's our best interest that you thrive in this project, so please consider us a partner going forward.
Awesome. We're gonna wrap. I want to, what I heard was a really motivational, set of comments, right? To think about remediation, to think about brownfields as an opportunity and not a constraint, and to be unburdened in a lot of ways by the decisions that we made in the past and focused on how to build a more inclusive future. And so I'm really grateful and thankful to you, Samuel, and you, Thanne, for being here, for you especially for filling in with short notice. I'm going to turn it over to Jean, who is going to close this out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really enlightening and help us generate additional conversation. That concludes the 6th Annual California Land Recycling Conference. I'd be remiss not to ask DTSC, CCLR staff, EPA staff, please stand. This conference is possible because of their hard work and dedication. Thank you so much. I've been hearing such wonderful things about the content and the ability to network and the conference itself. So really, your great effort has made this possible. I would just lean into our theme this year of transforming land, empowering communities. This is the time to meet the moment, to stay grounded in our values, and to lift each other up. Please complete the Whova app, and we hope you will stay in touch with us, and we'll see you again next year.